Hello and welcome to Latitude Photography Podcast. This is a live edition where we're going to be taking a look at listener-submitted images. I'm so glad to have you here. My name is Brent Bergherm, host of the show, and this time we're looking at the theme of recent trips. So I'm thrilled to get to these images here in just a moment. Certainly this evening we're going live in the Facebook group, which I haven't done not too recently anyway. And I'm just trying to see if I can bring it up on my phone real quick. I guess that's just not going to work. And so this will be replayed on the YouTube channel that I have. Historically, I've been running these on YouTube, but I wanted to try it out here on the Facebook live system so we can see what's going on there with Facebook and just see what we can do to maybe reach more people or, again, just a different audience. We'll see what happens. All right, let's jump over now to our item, recent trips. Our first photo up for bid here, up for commentary. Now, there's a few things I guess I should say as well before we start putting this, before we start talking about these images. And that is the first item that we want to think about. I had mentioned on the podcast how I would be taking a look at a particular idea of a design principle. And I didn't announce which one that would be because I was just like, you know what? I really want to start honing this in and be a little more focused in on what we actually talk about with these reviews. And so the first several images here don't necessarily exude these design principles super strongly because, again, I'm just going to pick on one that I'm going to focus on. So there's nothing that is, the people, the listeners that submitted these images, there's nothing there that I want to make them feel like, oh no, if I had only known, because you didn't know. It was a mystery. I haven't even told you yet of what it was. Certainly as I look at this image though, by Ken Martin, it actually does exhibit some of these ideals of lines. So I wanted to look at just this design principles of lines. Leading lines, curvy lines, S lines, straight lines, horizontal lines, anything along that idea is what I wanted to be able to look at tonight. So let's go ahead and do that and start talking about these. Now, again, we're going to be kind of firing through these first few a little bit because maybe they aren't as, quote, strong in the lines idea. And then as we get to the item with lines, then we will slow down a little bit and we will take a look. Let's take a look at these images now that we have a few of these wrinkles ironed out, and let's start off with it. So Ken Martin, it says, just got back from my trip to Mohegan Island, Maine, was looking for a giant field of lupins as a foreground element, but only found them in clumps of 8 or 10 flowers. This photo was taken at the lighthouse with a 28-300 Tamron mounted on a D610 shortly before sunset. All right. So in this image, I do appreciate the composition as it relates to the nature of those lupins and the lighthouse. The thing that I'm wanting a little, there's two things I think that I'm wanting a little more of something, and that is, I think some way, a little more light, a little more presence on the foreground, whether you're going to use a reflector to bring some light back in, I think would be very helpful, or maybe even a flash. We hardly ever talk about flash on this podcast, but this might be an area where just the very slightest amount of flash to just take those foreground elements and just give them the slightest pop, that would, I think, be potentially helpful here. Also, in the lower right-hand corner, we do have this element of a lupin really out of focus, so it's a little bit too close. I would say go ahead and try and move that out of the way. So whether you're going to use your hand and just temporarily move it out of the way or something like that, because these items that are coming across in front of the lighthouse, I think that certainly makes a lot of sense, and that's a fine compositional layering element. So we are looking to use and talk about lines. So these two items, especially on the left-hand side, as they launch upwards, Wendy is saying it's working on her phone too, could not get it to play on the Mac. I will have to look into that and see why that is the case. It's so odd that it wouldn't work on your Mac. or other desktop computers. It seems like other people are having problems with that. And I just, since this is the first time going to Facebook, this is an interesting, well, the first time in a while, this is an interesting little issue going on. So thank you for letting me know what your issues are. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, David, for letting me know what your experience is. All right, the next image, let's go ahead and shift over to that. Maybe just really quickly again, with these lines, it does launch the eye up towards that lighthouse, and that's kind of fun. But what we want to think about too is how strongly, how much do we want to use those lines to launch us to the lighthouse? Since that lighthouse isn't in focus, we want to have something that those lines will lead towards, or otherwise not be so strong in the lines. And that's why I like this image that isn't hugely strong in the lines, so it's not just always going to be doing that for the eye, but still pretty much you're going to be launching up. You're going to see the fact that that lighthouse is there, and then you're going to come right back down to the lupins because that lighthouse is out of focus. And that's, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just telling you what the eye is going to experience. All right, this image from Kevin Cowley. The closest thing we have come to a trip recently is our first long backpack hike up on Mount Hood. Ooh, that's awesome. I might be going there shortly. My summer schedule has just been put into a blender, and it's just crazy. I'm going to be going on a lot of smaller trips here in the Pacific Northwest, and then I'll still do my big trip back east to Minnesota in September, and North Dakota, South Dakota as well. But I think I may have mentioned I was going to do a trip where I was going to go down and get out to Florida and such like that. Well, unfortunately, that's off, but we have more pressing needs that have to be addressed. And so going to Mount Hood, that's why I actually might be going out there this weekend, next week, actually. So that's just sidetracked. So let's get back to it. Dick, thank you. Yeah, it's working on the phones, but not computers. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there either. All right. Navigating the snow-covered trail through the woods using GPS, we made it up to the Cooper Spur shelter on Mount Hood and spent the night. I had in mind to capture a picture that included the Milky Way, the Cooper Spur shelter, and Mount Hood. But with another group which had set up their tents right next to the shelter, I was unable to get this angle that I needed to capture the whole scene. Yeah, that's too bad, You just want to sometimes just kick them out and say, "Hey, I need to take a photo." But obviously, they have, they need to enjoy the space too. The thing I like about this image, we do have some foreground light on the subject itself. I do think it might be a little bit too much foreground light, but that whole idea of Mount Hood, you're way up high on the side, you're getting a little more of that crest. You have these stars, these very distinct stars, and we just have a beautiful image of the evening time. If we could maybe also, I don't know, again, this is this is a challenge that I have as a reviewer, where I don't know exactly what the setup is. I don't know exactly, what's to the right or to the left of the tripod here. But if we could provide a little more separation, I think, between that building and Mount Hood, we would then have an implied line between those two elements. And so we'd go back and forth. The eye would go back and forth between those two elements. And I think that could be a good thing. So that would be my recommendation, is to provide a little separation between those two items, so we don't have, because that roof line, we have a peak going, and then we have a peak in the mountain, of course, too. And so they're pretty close together. I just say separate those out a little bit. That might be a good thing to think about as the composition for that image. All right, this next image, Peter Turnbull. There was a little more of a caption, but since Peter submitted more images than in one post, it doesn't catch it here, and I'm not going to be able to go and grab all of those items. But yeah, that's okay. So we have here some surfers there on the beach. I love it when the sand it's all wet like that, and it's just reflecting the sky colors, reflecting those brilliant colors that are in the sky. And then we have this row of rocks, and then we of course have some waves, and then we have the city. So this image is using some good layering effect that's going on. Excuse me, getting over a cold. And we have a little bit of activity going on with the surfers, and they're tending to their the cables or the wires, the bungees that are attached to their ankles, it looks like, and one walking towards us sort of. What would be interesting to think about on this image is either, I think, focus a little more intently on them, eliminating the city, or getting a little more spread out possibly. I don't know. I really do appreciate the reflection that's happening there. And then if there's some way to emphasize that line of rocks, I think that line of rocks could be a really powerful item. The thing that I think actually is working pretty well, definitely the color is coming through really well. We have some negative space down on the right-hand side, and then that line of the water is just leading you right back to the person that's walking towards us. And so if your eye sort of wanders a little bit, you're just going to come right back into it. So there is a space for the eye to rest, but then you're just right back into the action. So that's kind of nice. All right, the next image here. All right, this is Wendy Gunderson's image. I know she's watching, so here's your image, Wendy. My first time submitting. Thank you. I'm glad you joined the party here. Excited to hear about the feedback. This image, entitled Relax, is from Miami Beach in late March. You flew down, stayed on Miami Beach a few days, and then drove to Key West. Yes, Key West is an awesome place. The lifeguard was really upset about something, and the young lady believed she had a really good explanation. Shot on a Mamiya 6 medium format rangefinder and the Mamiya 50mm f4 on Fuji 400H film. Yeah, that Mamiya 6 rangefinder, I remember back in the day, I was really drooling over the Mamiya 7 because it had the 6x7 size. This is the 6x6 centimeter size film camera using the medium format film. And so, yeah, you shot it there on that Fuji 400 negative film. The thing that I think actually works on this image is the fact that, well, number one, your horizon is just really level. It's so easy to get our horizons a little bit kiltered off, but it feels like it's right in the middle. And I actually like that on this image because it chops your image directly in half. You have a little bit of calm up above with those clouds, the calm blue, that turquoise water is coming out really well. And then you have that negative space calm down below, just not as much. And so right in the middle, that's where the activity is. What would be interesting on this image is, I think if we were to have a slight, the ever so slightest, and when I say something like this, I really want to go overboard in emphasizing subtlety is key. But what I want to do on this image, I want to be able to lead the eye around a little bit. I want to control that in a more subconscious manner. And so what I would suggest doing actually is overall darken the image just a hair. Take your exposure and just go down just the tiniest amounts, maybe a quarter of a stop, tenth of a stop, somewhere in there. And then maybe, if you're in Photoshop or what have you, and then take an area where you connect a brightness area, where you take it back up to normal brightness where it is right now, and you connect that young woman with that lifeguard and maybe make it a little bit of a triangular shape. So you start at the young woman, you go to the lifeguard, and then you kind of let it come up a little bit and out towards the woman again, but you're highlighting some of those waves, you're highlighting some of those people again, and that will lead the eye back down to the young woman. What you're going to do there is you're going to create a little more dynamic sense of just what we have. This is feeling more like that idea of a journalistic type image. And so it's a recording of what was going on, but we can add a little more of that design flair, if you will, when we're going to more acutely control the eye and where it's going. Because I think people are going to get a little bit, sometimes they're going to get a little bit caught up in that sand, or they're going to get a little bit caught up in those clouds. And we just want to bring them right back in. We just want to bring them and say, look at this. This is all you should be looking at. The other stuff is the stage. The other stuff is there. So yes, if we had just the tiniest amounts of darkening everything else, but leave these areas right where they're at. Now, of course, what you would then make that transitional area. When I'm saying make that item where those are brighter, a very soft edge brush, very large soft edge brush, and you just paint that little mask, if you will, over those areas so it connects them visually. And then we have a stronger implied line. And then the eye just goes back and forth, and we just look at the lifeguard, we look at the young lady, and there you have it. All right, this next one is by Mark Seidlecki. And every year I look forward to the Pelicans to come back to town. And this one is older. You can tell by the size of the bill. Yes, definitely. And the colors, that orange right around the eye, the kind of pinkish, orangish color that is the main part of the bill, that more narrow part of the bill. That's a pretty interesting. And Wendy, yes, you'll play with it. Awesome. And feel free, Wendy, and anyone else who is taking a listen to what you have here. If you wanted to revisit those and you want to go ahead and resubmit it to the Facebook group with those changes, by all means, that would be amazing. So we could see, and if you were to post before and after, then we can get other people chiming in saying, yeah, we had some good thoughts, or what if this, or what if that, or they might say, Brent's full of it and he just needs to not suggest people darken their images. I don't know. But feel free to do that. Anyone who's got images here, if you want to resubmit those, that would be fantastic. On this image, what I'm trying to think about, I think we need to position the bird a little more to the right-hand side of the frame. And really it just gives him, if we lowered him in the frame too, that might be acceptable, but that's not as important as moving him to the other side of the frame, to the right-hand side, just a little bit, because what that's going to do, it's going to give us some of that space on the left-hand side. And since we don't know what he's looking at, we just kind of naturally want a little more of that space to where his eyes are looking, to where all of that energy, his visual energy, the bird's visual energy, is moving towards. And if we have a little respite, a little empty spot for our eyes to rest in, it's just not gonna feel as sort of, it'll feel more complete, I guess, is the way I want to put it. Basically, that negative space in the lower right-hand corner, there's not as much value to that negative space being there as it would be if it were in the left-hand side, excuse me. All right, now we're going to get into more of this idea of lines. We're going to transition to speaking more intently about the design principle of lines. And now these could be any lines. These could be curvy lines, these could be straight lines, horizontals, straight up and down, straight horizontals, whatever it ends up being. Lines is what I wanted to kind of focus on here today. In this image, I do like the implied line between these stacks, these C stacks. We have this big major one out here. We have the one in the center, and then there's actually another one. You hardly see it, but there's another one a little bit back up to the left a little bit and up above that one that's in the center. And then, of course, you have the beach line. You have the waves lines. You have the horizon. Many, many lines coming in. So there's a lot of energy going on in this image, but I think the best line that we have is that implied line. That is those C stacks. Now, the only thing that is a little bit, I get this a little bit picky on those borders. That is when we have that border there on the left-hand side where that C stack just barely kisses the edge. That's where I'm going to say chop it off a little bit more, or make sure you fully encompass it. Where it feels like it's just barely kissing the edge and you're just chopping off a tiny amount, that's where there's just a little bit where the eye is asking subconsciously, it's asking, well, is there more? Is that it? And it's not solved. Where if we chop it off more, we just know there's more and we don't care about if there's more. Or if we include it all, there's that sense of it's all enclosed, it's all there. And that can be a good thing too. All right, on this one, we do have a few lines, certainly from the bird itself, the background horizon element, the jetty, whatever that is. We have the vertical lines in the background. Certainly the major thing is that bird that we're looking at. The straighter lines of the legs and the more kind of subtle S curve that's happening with that neck and going to the head and the beak. About the only thing that's going on for me in this image that is something I want to think about is right where that head meets that vertical line of the background. I would like more separation there. And I suppose I should read. This is Julie Chapa. During a recent visit to Galveston, Texas, I was fortunate enough to have this blue heron land close by me on the beach. Canon 7D and the Sigma 100 to 400, and the lens was set to 227 millimeters. All right. So yeah, that's the only, if the bird were just slightly more, or if we were shifting ourselves a little bit to the right, and that would provide separation for the background element. It's just there's that little bit of that element where it is the same color as the bird's neck. It is out of focus for good, that's good, but we just have a little bit too close there, and that's about the only thing that my eye is just distracted by a little bit. And then there's a little bit way in the far lower right-hand corner that should be cropped out, but otherwise, certainly nice and beautiful capture of this heron. All right, this next one, David Patton, submission for recent trips. This one was tough just because I haven't had much chance to get out this year. Yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to do something recent trips, in hopes that it would actually inspire people to go ahead and get out. But I didn't want to make it, when I released the idea, I didn't want to make it something that was, you got to have a new picture, because there's just a little bit too much maybe stress in that idea, where you might think, oh, I need to go out and produce something for this review kind of a thing. And as you probably saw in the meme that I posted in the Facebook group that said, creativity and stress tends to be opposing forces. Certainly not all the time, but they tend to be opposing forces. And I am totally not about creating stress for people. I've had plenty of times where I've told students or workshop attendees or just any number of people, when you're trying to create something and you're trying to match your purpose, match your ideals, is definitely going to be beneficial if you are relaxed, if you are not feeling under the pressure, kind of a thing. So that's why I said, this recent trips could go anywhere from the beginning of the year until when you submit it. That would be great. It's been hard finding time to travel, at least purely recreational travel, so my trip wasn't anywhere spectacular or grand, but it was a fun exercise to find somewhere interesting to shoot within a few hours of home. That's awesome. Yes, within a few hours of home. I'll definitely be doing a lot of that this summer, looking to hopefully be an inspiration to y'all as well, to say, you know what, we can just do some great stuff and have some great times, great experiences, even just a couple hours from home. That's good stuff. I ended up going to a Japanese garden that's close enough to make a day trip out of and use the opportunity to finish a roll of film. I kind of wondered if it was film, because when I first saw this image, I was like, it's just a little bit lower contrast. It feels like it has that film sense to it, and it does. All right. Not really anything in the strength of the lines here, really. What we do have a little bit, kind of, sort of, if you wanted to twist my arm, going with those out of focus trees. But certainly everything is right here on this subject. If we were to really pick out on a different design principle, we're looking at a principle of isolation, a principle of saying this thing is all by its lonesome. It is in an environment, yes, but it's all by itself, and that's what this image is about. I sort of wish I had a little more backed off view, because I don't know the nature of this object and how it's sitting on the ground. And my mind is just thinking, is it a really tall object? Is it a short object? Is it literally the ground is like right there underneath it? Or is there more space until we hit the ground? I'm just wanting, for some reason, a little more, because of my unfamiliarity with the subject. If I had greater familiarity with the subject, I think I would be okay with this and it would have a lot more meaning to me. But as someone who doesn't have familiarity with the subject, then I think what I'm looking for is just a little more back off a little bit and show us the entire subject in its environment. Also, there is a little bit up here, this area up here, way in the top where it's blown out. that is something that would be nice to try and find some way to accommodate for. Whether it's a little bit of work in Photoshop where you literally just kind of paint something in there, that's just slightly distracting. But at least the rock sculpture thing is pointing to it, so to speak. Now this one actually I'm going to show twice because Robert Clay, excuse me, like I said, I'm recovering from a cold. Robert Clay originally submitted this one, and then you can see behind my little circle here the recropped version. And so I clicked on that, and I have this one as well. I want to talk about the lines really quick first. And there are more implied lines. We do have the water. That's what I really wanted to look at, is that water coming into the subject, and then the rays of the clouds coming out of the subject. Or you could say coming into the subject as well. And then, of course, just the chaos that is the subject itself. And there's a lot of beauty there. But he received a recommendation from Frank Gallagher to do this cropping instead. And I do appreciate this cropping. It does provide greater strength to those lines. So while it does move it to that rule of thirds position, that's not something I want to always be looking at and saying it's not a good picture unless you adhere to the rule of thirds. What it does is it enhances the strength because it's moved to the side. It enhances the strength and the presence of both those cloud lines and those water lines. Again, the water lines are really more implied, but those clouds are super strong. And this just helps a little bit make that a little bit stronger, and that's really nice. All right, this image. Now, Darren, he is actually submitted two, but this is the only one I'm going to be showing tonight. Last weekend, I took a trip to a part of California's Central Coast that I had not visited before in the hope of finding some new Milky Way locations. Sadly, the marine layer was in, and nesting snowy plovers meant most of the beach was off limits. But I was struck by this sign. They're there to protect the snowy plovers breeding grounds and the nothingness behind it. That's what I was struck by too. If you can read my little commentary there that I put on this image, the simplicity here, also the paradox of why is this stop sign here? So people who don't know just see this and they're just like, they're just struck and they're just like, what? This is odd. We have this beach. We can tell it's a beach. We have the water coming in, super soft fog. This here, like I said, the marine layer is just there. But then the stop sign, it's just like, what's that about? As we're talking about lines, well, certainly that post for the stop sign is on a very strong, very commanding line. And then the more softer line of the beach transitioning to the water. And then we have that even softer line of the horizon. So lots of softness, lots of different layering going on with this image. And then, of course, when we think about the colors, that really stark red in that sea of blue. I just love that, those complementary colors. And then it's all supported by the warm hued sand. Good stuff going on there. I don't think there's anything I would do cropping wise or anything like that. I think we have a beautiful amount of vignetting in the corners that's going on. It keeps the eye right where you need it. We have virtually zero detail where we don't need it, and all the detail where we do need it is just coming along pretty nicely. All right, this image, definitely a nice, beautiful image. Alan Aber. He also submitted more than one image, so we don't have his little thing here on screen, but this is exuding definitely lots of lines, but also a really good amount of texture. Love the texture coming through here. He had mentioned that he did this recently on a workshop with Nick Page, and so he submitted it here for review. That's awesome. Thank you for submitting this image. So this looks like you're at Bandon Beach on the Oregon coast. Feel free to correct me, but I think that's the Wizard. Yeah, I know it is. I see Face Rock there on the left-hand side, and then the Wizard Hat towards the right-hand side. And yeah, with that water rushing in, we're low enough. We get the feel of all that motion, those really interesting clouds, all the wonderful textures going on, but those lines of that water rushing in the slower shutter speed. Good job there. And really nice too about the energy created with that vignette. I do think maybe the vignette is just a slight bit strong, where those all around the edges, it feels very even and it feels a little bit strong. What I might suggest doing is doing what I call a custom vignette, where you just paint it in. And so it becomes more of an organic shape that you paint in rather than just an even, and it feels like it's a really even choking in of those brightness values. And that's where I would say maybe try just a little bit of a custom vignette so you can have a little more of that brightness around the clouds of the face rock. You can have a little more brightness around the clouds on the opposite side. And then you can play with also those energy lines coming from the water motion with a custom vignette, to where some of them are a little brighter as they come down. I think that can create a little more interesting eye movement potentially. So that's my recommendation there. All right, this next image by Brett Baker. Let's click it over. There we go. And I'm trying to remember, he submitted multiples, and I cannot remember where he shot this. It's a nice, beautiful mountain scene. The thing that I really liked about this, certainly strong line, that's fine, but really the layering. So there's something to be said about there. I do feel potentially the saturation is just a touch a little rich on the greens, but we do have a good layering effect with those trees in the foreground, trees in the background, mountain, clouds. And it with all those little extra lines coming through and converging and whatnot, it just creates a little fun trip for the eye, and that's kind of nice. All right, this next image by Jeremy Schwartz. Does it count as recent trips if it's still ongoing? You bet it does. Thank you for sharing. I've been through hiking the Appalachian Trail since early April, and it's been an amazing experience. This is a self-portrait while I was at the iconic McAfee Knob in Virginia. I had tried to get to the top at sunrise, but wasn't able to make it until 8. As it turns out, you need to be up there at sunset if you don't want to be a silhouette. Yeah, it's still pretty nice. It's still, that that little bit of a flare coming from the sun, that little bit of, the silhouette is enhanced by the clouds because, we have that extra contrast going on there. I just wonder, I don't know the location here. And I'm just trying to think. It might be fairly interesting if we were to zoom in a little bit. I'm just wondering if there's a way to zoom in and enhance the notion of wide open space and eliminate these trees, this foliage in the foreground. I just don't know if that's going to be possible with where he was standing. But still, that idea of looking off into the area there, looking off to the left-hand side, and we have that open space. That's what's important, I think, because if this were shifted where the person was right in the center, that's where I would be saying, no, we need to shift it off so we have more space for that person to look into. But this is coming along pretty good. And maybe we'll see something else from Jeremy since he's through hiking. That's quite the hike. That's pretty awesome. All right, Gary Adickman, we've seen several from him in the past. Thanks again for submitting. That's wonderful. Dismal Falls, Parisburg, Virginia. A stop during a drive from New Jersey to Florida, though tough lighting, I prefer shooting waterfalls on cloudy days, absolutely. But on a short stop during a long drive, you do the best you can with what you've got. Absolutely. And this is not too bad. Gary slowed down the water. We've got lots of good motion in that water still. It is a little bit on the high contrast side still, but again, he did a pretty decent job of balancing that out. And then, as we're talking about lines tonight, that very strong leading line of that icicle covered log going right up into the falls, and then we have another one that's underneath it, kind of interrupting the eye a little bit, but that just creates a little bit of interest. So you launch right up into it, then you come down the falls, you come back up that other log, and just that's a nice little visual circle trail that you're stuck on, and that's really cool. I really like that. I think what I might suggest on this image, I'm trying to think a little bit as I look at the image. What I might think about doing is trying to isolate certain sections of the waterfall, because we do have the blue sky in the background, we do have some trees, and we just have this contrast of sorts where it feels springtime already with those trees, with that nice blue sky, yet it's frigidly cold with the icicles. And I just wonder if we could emphasize that coldness, that coolness, if we were to isolate a little more and be a little more zoomed in a little bit, possibly. Maybe stepping a little bit to the right and zooming in a little bit to the left. That will create a little more horizontalness in that log, that line that's created by that log. And then the last thing I want to think about too is the filtering that you might do. I've done shots like this that do tend to, I think they tend to turn out pretty well when you have like a 10-stop filter and you really slow down that water and you really make it super silky. This is mostly silky, but we still have a little bit of texture coming in. When you do that, you give the water a whole nother life, and the eye is then not wanting it to be water per se. The eye accepts the fact that it just has this different texture. And so we're then less distracted by the brightness and the dappledness of the light. I have had some turn out pretty well. The first time I did this, I was in Croatia shooting Krka waterfalls, Krka National Park, and it was just blazing. And I was like, well, the only thing I can do is put on my 10-stop and slow that water down. And on the small screen, I was like, whatever. But when I got back on the computer, I was like, that's not bad. It's not as good as it could be, but it's not bad. And then I did it again at the Oregon coast, and it's a technique that it can work pretty well. Another thing you can do if you don't have a 10-stop, take multiple exposures and do a thing called exposure averaging. I've got a video on my YouTube channel about exposure averaging that you could take a look at and see what that's all about. All right, Ryan Cameron, here we go. Getting back to normal. On the, Incredicoaster at Disney California Adventure on June 10, decided to try out the Leoa 9mm ultra wide on your 6400. Yeah, 6400 is a good camera. That's what you're seeing me on actually right here, the Sony a6400. I bought the lens to shoot bathrooms for real estate photography, but couldn't help try out on my favorite roller coaster while technically the image is upside down from my true vantage point. I think it almost looks like it was captured by a drone instead of me in the back of a roller coaster. That's awesome. So you're in the back of a roller coaster, and yeah, so it's upside down from your vantage point. That's so cool because basically you're upside down, right? So that's really cool. I really appreciate that. Very strong curved lines. The biggest thing here is that shadow area on the sign and then the support structure next to it. We have that. It's separating. It's creating two halves of the image. This Pixar pier and then, of course, this structure, which includes the roller coaster. And then we have this contrasting element of the blue sky, the bright sun. And so those contrasting colors are beautiful. I should say complementary colors are beautiful. Yeah, there's not much. I can't think of anything that I would say do this or that, except for diving into Photoshop and bringing a little more life back into that sun, just so it's not popping straight out. And you have to fake that. You just, again, subtlety is key, so it doesn't feel fake. It's super easy to make something like that feel fake. But otherwise, no, you've got a really high shutter speed, so it's really capturing it well. The super wide angle is doing good. And the fact that they let you take this camera on the roller coaster, wonderful. And yeah, that's just great. I would have expected them to say, no, you can't do that. And for some reason, I have lost my mouse. So I will use my touchpad. There we go. Lisa W's. Uluru last week with the goal of taking photos in places often not seen. The eclipse was under a cloud, but the following night we used the full moon to light up the southeast corner. The challenge was the long shadows formed and the park closing before the moon would rise high enough to eliminate them. Yeah, when you're dealing with parks and closing times, that can be a frustration. But the thing about this, how it relates to lines, well, really it's just about that line of that mountain edge. We have two of them, really. The shadow mountain, and then we have the one that's lit up. And then we have a little bit on that trail where Lisa's signature is. So that's an implied line. If the signature wasn't there, you would feel more like just walking right in. It's an invitation to walk right in, and I do like that. It's nice stuff. Great color. The fact that it's lit by the moon. Always love these kinds of things because this is not what the eye sees. This is what the cameras can see. And if we could see it like this at night, that would be, this then wouldn't be special. But the fact that we do have that notion of where we're viewing this at nighttime, that's just really cool. I do like that. As far as suggestions, I'm trying to think if there's any way to either emphasize the presence of those grasses in the foreground. So that might mean lowering your perspective a little bit, and that would also emphasize the path. I think that's about the only thing I would say to modify just slightly this image, because then it will give you a slightly more inviting, slightly more involved foreground, and it really will just soak you in and draw you into the image. And then in doing so, you might end up reducing the quantity of sky a little bit, and that'd be okay, most likely. But we would want to not reduce it too much. The sky is the thing that makes this image feel unique. How those stars are there, the deep blue, that's what makes this feel unique. And so we don't want to lose too much of the sky. But if we lost just a hair of it when we lowered the camera, that would be okay. It wouldn't be the end of the world. Again, I'm going to my mouse, and for some reason it decided to die. So I'm going to use my trackpad once again. All right, Rick Pot. We are on image 18 of 21, so we are almost done. Was heading out for a hike in the Sierras last month in search of some wildflowers to photograph as part of some larger landscape shots. However, a late storm had come through and caused me to change my plans on the fly. Spotted this little pond from a trail overhead and loved the beauty and peacefulness of the moment. Absolutely. It is very peaceful, very beautiful. And what I find a little bit ironic is you were going there to shoot wildflowers and you got snow instead. I think that's almost hilarious, actually. But kudos for sticking with it. That's what you got to do when you're when you're a landscape photographer. You pretty much, I learned this a long time ago, you pretty much have to just go regardless of the weather. Unless it's an absolute deluge, you just got to go. And just get what you get, kind of a thing. Hope for the best, plan for the worst, and get what you get. All right, lots of lines in this image. Where the water meets the snow, each tree, and then it's broken up a little bit in the water itself. Now, what I might suggest doing, so I'm going to interrupt here. Ryan says, thank you for the comments on his photo. Actually, the cast members want to see the shots I get, so I'm often showing them the back of the camera when I get back in for another. Yeah, yeah, good. It is good to show, show the people what you're shooting as you're shooting it, because that helps them be involved in the image making, and it relaxes them. So that's good stuff. All right, back to this image, Rick Potts image, and that is something I'm trying to think, what would I do on this image? The thing I find slightly distracting on this image is I think we have a little bit too much foreground. I kind of want to zoom in a little bit. Do you see in the water where we have that transition of the very bright sky transitioning to no longer the reflection of that bright sky, but we sort of start to see into the water itself or onto the ice, if it's actually ice, but it feels just like water. But anyway, so yeah, that transition where we're losing the reflection, I find that to be just a little bit on the distracting side. So if we were to tip the camera up or zoom in a little bit and see what we can do to find compositions, what that would do is it would more simplify the composition, and we would be able to focus in more on those elements. Now, if your overall goal was to say emphasize the widths and the breadths of that shoreline, then I might just say, okay, either crop the bottom off or take a darkening vignette only on the bottom. It looks like we did it a little bit on the top, but take it only on the bottom and enhance the depth, the darkness of that item across the bottom. All right, this next image, Patrick Doherty, from a visit to Gettysburg National Battle Park at Sunset Easter weekend. This is a monument for one of many Pennsylvania volunteer infantry regiments, shot with a Canon R5 and 16 to 35 f2.8. I just picked up an R5. I have yet to open the box. I will do, I think, an unboxing video maybe tomorrow. I'll shoot the video and maybe publish it soon afterwards. But back on track. The thing I really appreciate about this image, the lighting is really good for sure. So it's nice. Did he say this was sunrise? Sunset. Okay. So a nice late day light, great texture coming through on this sculpture. And then we have enough of the background to just get a sense for the overall feel of the presence of the place. But that leading line, that gun, the barrel, leading right up to the sculpture of the gentleman. What I might do on this image in post-production, I might go ahead and suggest let's darken that foreground rock just a little bit. Very soft, darker towards the bottom, and it very evenly transitions up. Not as much on the left-hand side because that's where your interesting element is, but a little more on the right-hand side. So you need a little bit of that custom vignette idea again. And then that's going to just take your eye, launch you right to the guy. You might be like, oh, what's he looking at, over to the left, and your eye goes back to the left, but it will always go right to him. And that's what I like to see in a composition, is you're taking the eye and you're delivering you're delivering your viewer right to that thing you want them to look at. And they have no choice but to look at that thing because it's just so obvious that that's what they should be looking at. Pardon my throat clearings. I'm needing to get a drink too. Thankfully, this cold is almost over. All right, Jarek has an image here, an idyllic landscape in Yorkshire Dales, UK. That's awesome. We've got something from the UK. We had something earlier from Australia. I really love seeing these international to me images. So the more the merrier. I hope we can see more as we come. In fact, maybe that's one of the topics I need to do. Not the US. Not this time. I already have it chosen for this time. I thought I did. I thought I wrote it down here. But anyway, yeah, maybe we'll do that. I don't know. Anyway, back on this image. The weather was changing rapidly, but we've managed to get a few sunny moments so needed after a long lockdown period. Absolutely. I've tried to lift the blacks to get kind of a matte effect. Any constructive criticism, welcome. Canon RP 24mm at f11. Yeah, so that matte effect. Actually, I think in this image, that's kind of working for you. I think you may have lifted them slightly too much. What kind of tells me that, usually my go-to goal on an image is to always have some kind of foundational element that is a full solid black. And it could be just like 3 or 4 pixels in the image. As long as I have something that's full solid black, that's usually a goal of mine. If you were to do that in this image, though, I have a feeling you would block up too much of that rock fence. So it would be something that you don't want to do holistically on this image, but what you might be able to do, for instance, take that moisture that's along the rutted trailway, the rutted road, and maybe remove that, lifting the black's tonality, remove that from just that area there. Again, you'll have to have a very soft brush. If you're using an adjustment brush in Lightroom, just make sure it's a super soft brush, a fairly large and super soft brush, and just go down that waterway. And that will allow the waterway to have a few more of those slightly darker areas. And then I might do that too to that fence on the left-hand side, at least a little bit of that fence on the left-hand side, but maybe leave mostly that tonal value that you have on the right-hand side. And I just wonder what would happen there. Maybe it's going to look totally ugly because it just feels like it doesn't belong. Totally, we run that risk. But usually I like to see a little bit of that, something a little greater contrast coming through in that idea. Now we do have bright, puffy, beautiful clouds. Another way to look at this image is to say, okay, what can we do to emphasize that sunniness, emphasize those clouds? So if we were to tilt that camera up a little bit, lower the camera, tilt it up a little bit, and maybe emphasize, if we can, emphasize one of those fence lines and really see what we can do to work with that fence, maximize those textures, maximize those forms, and see what we can do with that. It wouldn't give you the overall presence of the countryside, so I do appreciate that, and I do appreciate the texture of the rocks and those lines that are leading right very strongly in there because it's a road and you have the fence. So the leading lines are just gorgeous. They're doing a really good job. It's just, I look at an image like this and I just start thinking, ooh, all these things are firing off in my head. What could we do? What would I think of doing? Oh, so habit of using that mouse. Okay, this is our last image coming up here. All right, John Sharp. A couple of days ago, I was in Fort Pierce, Florida for an overnight rest stop on my way home from Key West. Another person went to Key West. Awesome. I walked out of the beach at sunrise with hopes of a break in the clouds. Was pleased to walk away with this image. Absolutely. That energy that's happening in the color there is just amazing. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous light. That's awesome. Now, anything that I might suggest, again, we're looking at lines, so we certainly have the pathway to this lifeguard tower, and then, of course, we have the horizon line and such like that. So nothing super strong except that pathway is pretty much a line that leads you in. So that leads the eye in. You go to the guard tower, then, of course, the eye is drawn right to that color. That color is extremely bright, extremely warm. The bright, beautiful yellows. The eye is just drawn right to it. What I think I'd like to see happen is a little more brightness coming to the lifeguard tower. Again, subtlety is key here, but let's create a path. Remember on that image, I think it was Wendy's image of the young woman and the lifeguard, and I was saying, let's create a visual path between those two people. Well, here we already have the image that's nice and dark, and we don't need to make the image overall any more dark. What I would suggest doing then is, let's take that pathway. If you're in Lightroom, take an adjustment brush, fairly large, super soft, and let's create an exposure adjustment that is that pathway going up to the lifeguard station, and then maybe launching you a little bit towards that bright cloud. So you have a very distinct, very open pathway where the eye just says, okay, this is where I have to go. It's the brightest thing. It has detail. I'm going to go up to the guard station. I'm going to go over here to the beautiful color, and then we're done. The journey of the image, the journey of experience of the image is done. If you do that, what you're going to do, I think you're going to create a little more interest in the image, because the viewer will feel like they've gone on a little tiny journey with you. You've taken them on that journey. You have led them where you want them to go, and more obviously where you want them to go, and they are delivered to their destination, and then they will basically start all over again. The way it is now, where those are a little bit on the darker side, it gives you the presence, it gives you the sense of the environment. It just doesn't invite that activity. And so I want to emphasize, I'm suggesting we emphasize that activity. And so that's where it comes from. Peter says, been working and only now catching the tail end of the show. Yes, I will leave it on Facebook, and I will take this recording probably tomorrow. I will put it on YouTube. So no problem, Peter. You'll be able to watch it in either location. We did cover your image. I remember taking a look at your image earlier. So no worries on that. This is the last image. We are done for tonight. So let me switch away from that. There we are. And just want to thank you all for being here and interacting, reaching out there in the comments. I really do appreciate that. Appreciate always you sending your images. So the next design principle that we are going to be taking a look at is contrasts. Now, here's the thing. When we think of contrasts, I don't want you to only think the difference between dark and light, shadow and highlight, black and white, whatever the case might end up being. That is certainly a type of contrast, and that's certainly a valuable type of contrast. What I want you to be thinking about, though, is these other types of contrasts. What can we do with other types of contrasts? And maybe it's motion, where we have something that's frozen here and very solidly fixed, and then we have soft motion happening. We saw some of those waterfall pictures earlier where we had, in the case of, let's see here, hop back a couple images here. Because I didn't mention it on this image here. We have contrasts of texture because of the water flowing through and then the solid elements. We can have contrasts of color. We can have contrasts of other textures. So many different ways to have contrasts. So I just want you to think contrasts. What can we do with that whole idea of contrasts? Now, for the subject of what are we going to do, what I'd love to see happen is, what are we going to do? I think I don't want to force us to go international just yet. I think I'll wait for that until maybe August or September. But what I want to do, I want to focus on some ideas of either a state park or a natural reserve or a national park, anything along those lines that is some kind of land set aside for nature photographers, basically, whether it's a state park, even, this area would work. All of these areas actually would probably work. Let me skip ahead here. That one probably wouldn't work, but certainly, Uluru would work. This type of location again would work because it's at a national park, some kind of area like that. And potentially something like this could work too. It just depends on the nature of the space. So let's do what we can to focus on our efforts as it relates to what we're shooting, what we're submitting for next month. This is going to be for the month of July, and most likely will be the last Thursday of July. But I do have a boatload of camping and hiking and backpacking and all sorts of stuff coming up. If I have to mess with the schedule, I will. But right now my schedule is I will be back home on Thursdays, so it should be all fine. It should all be all good. So let's do that. Some kind of park, again, state park, Bureau of Land Management type lands, national park system type lands, anything along those lines. I'm casting a really wide net here, and especially for international, anything that fits that type of genre. We want to look at that. And then if we can think about the contrasts, that design principle of contrast, let's see what we can do to focus on that and let's see what happens of that. Maybe it's going to be awesome. Maybe it's going to not be so awesome. But let's see what happens. And then also do reach out. Let me know if you appreciate this better on the Facebook or if you want it back on YouTube. It seems if we can't get this coming on your desktop computers on the Facebook, again, I don't know why that is. I'm going to look into it and see if there's an issue there that I can figure out. But Yeah, we'll just go back to YouTube, and then you can watch it on the desktops there. All right, again, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you being here. I appreciate you hanging out this whole time. We've been here just over an hour. It's been a fantastic time, and we'll take a look at your images next month, and catch you in the next episode as well. And have a great time shooting. Until then, happy shooting.